Hello everybody, how's it going today? Glowplasma231 here, and today I'm back again here to talk about Tenmaku Cinema, chapter number 14. Yeah, that's right, we've got 14 chapters of this now. If you divide it by 7, you get 2, and that's the number good old 14. So yeah, like I said, we're talking about Tenmaku Cinema, chapter 14 today. This chapter is titled Himeki's Summer Vacation, which that's a pretty fair name for a chapter. I'll give it to Shunseki and Yuta Sakuda. They can name a chapter pretty well. But this is chapter number 14 of Tenmaku Cinema, and like normal, before we get into it, I like to talk about just a few general number of things, just to talk about the state series and other things like that. And there's one really big thing going on with Tenmaku Cinema right now, and that is that it is not doing well in Shonen Jump. In Shonen Jump, if you don't know, most of the series in there are on a ranking system. And this ranking system pretty much determines what stays and what goes in Shonen Jump. Now, over here in the West, we read most of our Shonen Jump stuff off of Viz, unless you pirate things, which I personally don't do for Shonen Jump things, right? I'm not saying I do anything else, but I think you get my point here. And while it doesn't always happen, for instance, with Shonen Jump with Viz, you can still sort of see that. Like, your highest tiers are always at the top, like One Piece, My Hero Academia, Black Clover. Those are massive series that, yeah, people really enjoy, so Shonen Jump is willing to push those, and Viz is pushing it too. But for instance, in Japan, in the actual Shonen Jump magazine, Tenmaku Cinema is getting the very back of the magazine, which means that you have to flip through almost everything else. And if you're reading Shonen Jump, the magazine, in order of it, it's all way in the back, so you're going to get to that last, and they're putting it in the back because nobody is really enjoying it. Which means that Tenmaku Cinema may not be long for this world. Its ranking is just really bad, just being constantly put in the back of the magazine. I mean, its other series that it started with, such as Kill Blue, Do Retry, and New Age Exorcist, are all doing better than it. Which really sucks, because out of all of them, I think Tenmaku Cinema has some of the best story writing going on with it, and it just really sucks to see that, yeah, Tenmaku Cinema may not be long for this world. But it's not something to immediately cry about, because if anything, they'll most likely give it 3 volumes worth of material, which will be about 25 chapters. So if I had to guess, we'll probably have at least 10 more chapters of it if the situation does not improve. And one way that it very much could improve is with its first volume sales, because today is, what's the month? July 24th of 2023, and today it was revealed what Tenmaku Cinema first cover of its manga volume will look like. You'll see that on the screen instead of the Shonen Jump banner, and I really do like this cover of the manga. I really like how it's got like the frame in it just to show like, yeah, it's a movie series, which is pretty cool, and I just like the art style in general of Tenmaku Cinema, so I like this volume cover. But if this volume sells well, then Tenmaku Cinema may be looking up. So we're just going to really have to wait to see until August 4th. That is when the first volume comes out. And that is when we as a collective will be able to tell, like, oh, is Tenmaku Cinema going to be staying, or is it going to be unfortunately axed? I don't want it to be axed, because I really love this series. You can probably tell by me talking about it here. So I hope the best for it, but we'll just have to see how that all comes out. But yeah, August 4th is when the first volume's coming out, so after that, the first 3 days of Shoseki sales estimations will really be a big deal for us, and then at that point, we can just see where the series is going. And with that, let's actually hop into the chapter. Like I said, it's chapter 14 of Tenmaku Cinema, titled again, Himeki's Summer Vacation. So last time on Tenmaku Cinema, if I'm not mistaken, we just had a simple chapter about Beto and him playing the role of Shimada in the movie The Shore. I think that was last chapter we did. Maybe in chapter 12. No, that was 2 chapters ago. That was chapter 12. Chapter 13, last chapter, was all about Tenmaku and his backstory, where we learned a bunch of stuff about him. That was the last chapter. Not 2 chapters, that was the last chapter. But moving on to this most recent chapter, we start off with Himeki. She is filming the movie that she was filming a few chapters ago. It was like chapter 10, whenever we first got introduced to director Fukashi Yukio and his assistant Mingo Yorime. No, that is the author of Oshinoko. her name was, she's the assistant director. Quote me on that, at least. But we see Yukio's here, and he's like, hey, cut, we're all good. And we see a bunch of the audience and staff is like, man, she got it again in one take today? She's on fire. Himeki, did your acting improve again? And we see that she's in the same, like, maid costume. And she's sitting there, and pretty much the assistant director walks up and is like, I think you look a lot more mellow. Is it maybe because you have a friend? And Yukio's like taking off his headband, like whipping it around. He's just like, she's always been capable of a performance like that, right? And pretty much the assistant director is like, hey, his name is Shinichi, right? And Karai is like, well, I'm not sure we're friends exactly. I would need to ask him to make sure, right? Which is thinking of, yeah, of course they're friends. We're working on a movie together for sake. So it's like, yeah, they're friends, but she's having her first friend, so it makes sense in this sort of scenario. But Yukio's just like, I don't think that's how a friendship works, which, yeah, he's got the right idea. But Karai's just like, well, I think I should get going, and whoever says this, it's probably Yukio, is just like, yeah, sure, looks like that was all we needed from you today, Himeki. You wrapped that up very quickly, right? And she's leaving, she's just like, hey, thank you for today. As we get our cover page, which is pretty much just all of the film crew just sitting, eating some lunch out there and on the site of filming something, right? It's a really cool backdrop. We just see all of the characters there, and they're all just hanging out as we see sort of a camera sort of, looks like it's maybe filming them or just filming the outside area while they're doing this, which is pretty cool. But we cut over now to Akitsu, who is standing outside his house and obviously waiting for someone as Karai appears. And we see that, okay, filming is going on at Akitsu's house today. As there's a little thing here of Karai just like, man, what a grand house is going on here. And Akitsu's like, yeah, it's just old and pointlessly big. Like, it's just too much, right? But Karai's just like, man, but this is really perfect for Nagisa's house. I mean, this is what we want, right? As we see what is actually going on is Karai and Akitsu are walking through the halls. We see that Akitsu's mom is here, and that she is pretty much the gossip queen of the town, because we see that Bito and Shino are distracting her from seeing that Karai is in the house, right? But she's just talking with him like, and they're like, Mrs. Akitsu, it's been too long, you're pretty as always, right? And she's like, oh, that's enough, thank you, right? And Akitsu explains that, like, hey, sorry, we have to sneak by. My mom loves to talk, and if she knows Himeki Karaki, the famous actors here, well, even if I tell her to keep it secret, I think she'd end up letting it slip somehow, right? And she looks in, and sees Bito and Shino in there, and she's like, oh, hey, where's director Shinichi, right? And he's like, oh, he's just coaching my grandpa, as we learned that, oh, Akitsu's grandfather is going to be playing the role of Nagisa's grandfather in the shore. So that's just a pretty cool thing altogether, right? And to make a note of, yeah, it was a good thing he took the role. And if we remember a few chapters ago, it was stated that there were 5 total characters, Nagisa and Shimada included, so there were 3 other main characters, and those were very easy to cast for, and Shimada was the hard one to cast for. But it looks like right now they are dealing with Nagisa's grandfather being Akitsu's grandfather. One thing to note is that Bito has re-dyed his hair, so it's his normal looking color now and not all completely black, so pretty cool, right? But we see that Akitsu's grandfather here is trying to spit out his lines. He's like, when Nagisa was young, she was so bashful about speaking in front of others. A shy girl, that one. But that all changed on that day, back when she heard her mother say those words. As we see that Hyrule just gets all super ramped up about it. And Hajime's just like, hey, man, tone it down a little, please. Like, if you could act a little bit more natural for it, right? As you're like, yeah, it's a battle getting Akitsu's grandfather to correctly say his lines, right? And we didn't see that Tenmaku is, of course, floating behind Hajime. And he's talking to Hajime, and he's like, yeah, that happens sometimes with amateurs. They go over the top, but probably because they're just nervous about playing a role in a movie. Even though this is a short film, it's the same difference, right? And Tenmaku just continues saying, and once they get stuck in that rut, it takes a while for them to get out of it. So it just takes time, but eventually it'll get done. But Hajime's just like, well, since Karai's here now, let's move on to the leading role scenes. As they pretty much walk her up to a room, and Harumi's like, hey, there's a room here on the second floor no one's using, so I asked everybody to bring a bunch of props, and we've set up Nagisa's room. As we see, yeah, it's an interesting looking room, just like fan and decor, but it's very lifeless, as we'll get here in a few minutes, right? And you're talking like, alright, the mic's in place, alright, so we're going to be filming our first scene where Nagisa gets home from school. Ready and action. As we see Nagisa gets in a room and drops her skirt, sort of weight off of her, and in a second you're like, oh no, please no. But we see she's just wearing a pair of pants underneath, and it's like, alright, that's good. And Hajime is like, cut, and Nagisa's like, or Karai's like, hey, is there anything wrong? I can redo it as many times as you need. And all of the guys just like, yeah, it was perfect. Makes sense. So now we get onto a sort of moment here where Hajime is like, alright everybody, let's stick to the plan and get a take of you now opening the window, Karai. And as this is all going on, Tenmaku comes over to Hajime and is like, hey, so is everything going alright? And Hajime is like, yeah, the indoor shooting is actually going really smoothly. It's a huge help that we don't need to worry about reflections or people passing by. And it's really easy to manipulate a phone here in this small room. Pretty much saying that if they had a movie camera, it would be really tough getting a good distance from the shock sprayer in an enclosed room. And a movie camera can take up like a few feet just of space, and you need to be behind it, while a phone, you can be all the way up against a wall and be able to still shoot something from very far away, as if you're at the doorway of a room or don't even know the wall's there looking in from the outside. So it makes it a whole lot easier. And we even sort of see something to where the actor with a phone can even see themselves acting with a screen sharing device, and that makes the whole sort of movie making stuff easier for the actor with just not using a movie camera. So shooting a phone in this situation is actually easier for all parties involved, which, yeah, it's pretty cool to know, and it does make a whole lot of sense. Check that out. But next, Hajime is like, hey, we just need to keep in mind that phone cameras can overcorrect for the brightness of an image, but looking like it today, today's shoot is probably going to be a piece of cake. And something I don't think I mentioned earlier is that Karai only has like 2 hours before she has to go home or something like that. So she doesn't have an immense amount of time to really deal with all of this stuff, right? But Tenmaku's like, hey Hajime, maybe you should check the footage before making all of these massive assumptions about what's going on here, right? Check what happens when you pull back the camera to get the entire room. As Hajime looks at it, right, and even Shino's like, hey, what's wrong with all this, Hajime? As Hajime is doing it, like, well, looking through a screen, the room actually looks really drab. And they look through the screen and everybody's just like, yeah, this room just doesn't feel lived in. Hajime's like, yeah, the scene just won't hold up. It's just not good enough. And they're all just come to a consensus that, yeah, the room needs to be filled with more stuff. It doesn't look like an actual room. It just looks like a set, like a movie set, and that's not what they need. And pretty much everything's going on here, and at this point, this is when we learn. And Hajime turns to Karai and is like, hey, you have to work after this, don't you, Karai? And she's just like, yeah, I need to leave in 2 hours. And that's where everybody sort of gets like, oh crap, as we sort of see that Akitsu and, not Akitsu, Bito and Shino sort of run back to their houses and bring back a bunch of stuff. And they're like, I brought a Hajime, right? And they just bring a whole bunch of stuff, right? And Akitsu's like, hey, we need more books and stuff, right? And Shimada's like, hey, would some manga work? I'll pretend she borrowed these from Shimada. As I do like the series that he has. He has a parody of Bleach in one hand where the main character has all black hair and it's something like Brooch or something like that, right? And we see Dragon Ball, which is Ball Dragon, and it's just a bunch of stuff like that. And he's got 2 of these volumes, like, oh, and they're pretty much making the whole consensus of, yeah, we'll pretend that she ended up borrowing those from Shimada, so makes sense. Sort of rationalizing all of this, right? And Karai's just like, well, we can use my things too if you like. I have a lip balm and a mirror and a bunch of stuff like that, right? And we see they're all just going crazy, like, all right, bring that a little closer. Oh no, where did the packaging all go? And it's all just like very frantic to figure this out, right? And eventually they're working on it, and Bito's like, man, this is a whole lot of work for a single scene that only shows up once. He was like, set designers must be amazing, right? As we see that Cry is also helping with all of this, and Hajime is just like, sorry, I should be making an actress help in this. Like, you're the star of our movie. Like, I'm sorry about all of that, right? But Cry's just like, oh, it's okay. This is actually a lot of fun, right? As they're all doing this, and Chino's just like, well, I think I get it. It's kind of like prepping for a culture festival, right? And Beto's is like, come on, culture festivals are such a pain. Like, who would want to put all of that work into something like that, right? He's just like, you have to stay after school and get bossed around by all of the girls, right? And Cry's just like, no way, I like him. It's a nice break from the routine, right? And all of a sudden, Beto sort of is like, goes over to Akitu, is like, hey, come on, Akitu. It'll look more realistic if it's way more messy, right? And they're all like, oh man, you were so into this after Cry said that to you. So, haha, funny joke. It's sort of the whole thing of where, yeah, Beto will do stuff if Cry makes him do it. So, it's funny enough. But Hajime eventually is like, whether we're doing it at a culture festival or actually making movies, as long as we're doing it with friends, it's pretty fun. As we see that Cry is like, oh, friends, that's nice. As we finally see all the books are scattered around and the room looks lived in, as they're just like ready, set, and action. As we don't see them filming the scene, but we see them looking at it after the fact, and Hajime is looking, he's like, whoa. And Tenmaku even makes a note of, yeah, it's looking really good. As we see a shot of Cry just sitting in the window of a room, and it looks really lived in and looks like an actual person's room. And they're all just like, yeah, this most definitely is Nagisa's room. And like, alright, that's a wrap for today, as Cry sort of has to change and either way I'm just like, alright, I'm off to my next job, see all you guys later. And pretty much they're all just like, hey, see you later, thanks for your work today. But we cut outside where Cry is there standing with Hajime, and she's like, oh good, looks like I can get a taxi right away today, right? And Hajime makes a note of, man, she seems so used to calling a taxi, even as a middle schooler, right? Like, that's not normal, but due to her job, it makes sense. But Hajime is like, man, you seem like you're in a really good mood today, Cry. And she's just like, I don't really think I am in particular, right? As Hajime is like, oh, you're not? Well, break a leg, I'll root for you, right? And they sort of like share a glance. There's just a little cute thing there. As we just get more mention as the narrator comes on, this is like, Himeki Karaki's summer breaks were always filled with filming and work, but this year seemed different from the previous ones. As we see that Karai sort of thinks of, as long as you're doing it with friends, it's very fun. And that's where we wrap up the chapter. A good, decent-sized chapter with just a really cute message to it of, yeah, Cry has friends. And that's really the long short of it, along with sort of teaching people about movies. And that's what I love this series for, and apparently it's not what the Japanese audience loves, because this series isn't doing great. But with that, I don't really have a whole lot more to say on the chapter. I do think it was just a very solid chapter, and a solid chapter at that. I don't think it'll win any awards as a chapter, but it was a chapter I enjoyed. And with that, if you enjoyed this Tenmaku Cinema chapter review, I've got plenty of others on the channel. I've covered most of the Tenmaku Cinema chapters that have come out, along with covering other manga series and anime series, and doing just random things that I think of. So if you like Oshinoko or Tenmaku Cinema or even World Trigger, I've got all of these reviews on the channel, and if you like them enough, then you consider subscribing and liking and do all that good stuff. Thank you very much. And with that, this has been Tenmaku Cinema Chapter 14, titled again, Himeki's Summer Vacation, and I'll see you guys next time for Tenmaku Cinema Chapter number 15. And with that, it's going to be Glowplasma231.